But certainly one of the most common phrases that I have to say
Yeah.
is, "Well, go ask them." And they'll come to me and they'll go, "Do you think the person next door minds moving their car?
Right.
Go and speak to them. They're right there, but they don't speak French, but you do." And I spend so much of my time going, "It's okay. If it all goes wrong, I'm here."
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Connected by Language podcast, the only shows that finds the most dedicated language learners out there and tries to learn from their craft. I'm your host, Michele, and I'm joined by my co host. Oh, okay. Well, usually what happens now is that my co host, Michelle, would be answering this call, but unfortunately, she's not available today. But don't worry, she's going to be back soon. But in case you don't know who she is, or maybe you're new to the show, maybe I should give a little bit of an introduction of what we do. Well, Michelle, my co host, is a language education specialist at Tandem. And what is Tandem, you might ask? Tandem is a language app where you can connect and practice languages with native speakers from all over the world, either on one chats or through group sessions called language parties. There are over 300 different languages supported on Tandem, so no matter what type of objective you're looking for, whether it's like refining your speaking skills or maybe finding some chill friends to hang around with, you will always find the perfect match for you. And the perfect language partners for you. And among people in this community, you may find someone like me. Hi, my name is Michele. I am from Italy. I speak Italian, French, English, a little bit of Japanese, and a little bit of German. And I just love talking about languages and meeting people from all over the world and basically to get to know them and seeing how languages have changed their prospects in lives or maybe changed their life for the better. And today we're actually going to do a little bit of a continuation from our previous episode. Not only we're going to get an inside look on the world of tutoring from one of the countries that has been mentioned the most in this podcast, France, but also we're going to continue on a thought that we had on our previous episode. If you haven't watched it, you should just click the title on the top screen, you will find it. But basically what we did is that we talked about the world of language rights, specifically how some less uh, like less covered languages need some help when in cases of, for example, crisis or to the global decision making. But in that episode, we talked mostly about the African communities. But you know that this sort of language rights and the language diversity not only affects those contents, it also affects, for example, Europe and some Sultan languages. So today we're going to explore those elements and we're going to just get a nuanced look into the world of language diversity. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Luke into the show.
Hello, hello, Michele.
Ah, it's so great to see you, and I'm very excited to know all of your life story when it comes to languages because I had a little bit of a sneak peek before this episode, and I know that your story is quite an interesting one. But before we go to the meat and potatoes, I think it would be nice to give a little bit of a personal journey and what you're all about.
So, hi, thank you very much for having me. So my name's Luke. I'm a British-born polyglot, and I grew up in a national park in the north of England. I actually went to school in a little town called Bakewell, which is a sleepy rural town known for its traditional pudding. After I went to school, I went to university, where I studied interpretation and translation with French and Spanish. And ever since my studies, I've spent almost all of my adult life living abroad. I've actually lived in 8 different countries in total:
Oh,
Argentina, Ukraine, Belgium, Spain, Denmark, and most recently France. I've been living here now for the last 7 years. Um, I work in a French language school where we welcome expats and tourists to learn French in a dedicated, immersive environment. Yeah.
it's very interesting that you mentioned your background being like in such a remote part of town. This is not the first time that people have started their language journeys from kind of like somewhere that is necessarily known for having
Yeah.
a massive international community. So I would like
Yeah.
to ask you a little bit more about, how did you came in love with with languages from such a rural town?
I agree. It's something that I actually hear quite a lot. People who have grown up in very rural communities. I certainly wouldn't say that growing up in the UK is what actually sparked my interest in learning languages. I think we can all agree that England, and especially its education system, is far from being this language lovers paradise of most of some places. But growing up in a rural setting, I distinctly remember always longing for the foreign, for the unknown. Um, I remember as well when we used to travel as a family. For example, we used to travel to Wales, we used to go on holidays to Greek islands, and I would be the child who would be trying to decipher the road signs in different languages. I'll be the child that would be leaning back on his chair in a Greek restaurant, just trying to work out at least one word of what the waiters were saying. Um, and I also remember at the age of 8, I asked my auntie for Christmas for a bilingual Welsh English dictionary, which she gave me. And it's still one of my most cherished possessions. And I remember living in this small rural community. She had to travel miles to try and source this bilingual dictionary that no child has ever asked for before.
Yeah, I would assume that that would be a very strange request coming from parents, because I have a pretty similar story, not about the deciphering thing, but let's just say that for example, I had a similar thing when it comes to wanting to travel somewhere. When I would
Mhm.
ask my parents to travel somewhere, I would always give the very random options. And I remember that one of my aunts was like, "Hey, Michele, where do you want to go this year for with family vacation?" And she was expecting like, "Oh, I want to go to Disneyland or something." I said, "I want to go to Sweden." And
Yeah.
everybody's like, what the hell is this? What the hell is
I
this kid about?"
I remember saying exactly the same thing to my parents about Turkey because I was for about a year during my childhood, I was obsessed with the Turkish language. I'd never even heard it before, but I was obsessed with it, and I was listening to Turkish songs. I was trying to and I was forcing my parents to take me to Turkey. But however, I didn't actually go to France
Oh,
as a child.
oh,
I
okay.
never actually went to France as a child. My first time in France was actually when I was 18 years old. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
Um,
it's a long time
so
to wait to get one of the most accessible countries to
it,
be in.
and also it happens to be the country that I've subsequently fallen in love with, and the one whose language I feel the most comfortable in. And it wasn't one of the languages that I loved the most when I was a child that ended up being the language of my dreams.
Yeah, but I still think that like love for discovering languages kind of like helped into this late love for French, because like it's still like a foreign language. A lot of people don't even get to learn more than one or two languages when they grow up. So it
I
yeah, you shouldn't like feel too bad about discovering the French language this late. I mean, I did the same as well. Like, I never learned French when I went there and I started living there. Only like 2 years ago, I went to France and I
Mhm.
had to learn it because I just so happened that I am studying there, so might as well learn it, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it's a good reason as ever. But
yeah,
I can say I can say for certain that nobody in the little village where I grew up speaks any other language than English.
yeah.
And so no matter which one you learn, you will always be one up.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something to you can, as the kids say, to flex on your on the people in the village. Actually, don't do that. So, but it's interesting because you had the experience, like a lot of people that love exploring cultures. You actually had the ability to live through a lot of different countries. So, I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, like, how did that journey from England to all of the various countries shape the way that you view communications as a whole today?
Um, well, first of all, it certainly very quickly dispelled the myth that everybody speaks English. I've actually come across more people as I've lived in different countries that don't speak English than actually do. And it's something that I say a lot to people that I meet in the UK. That actually it's a minority of people I meet that actually do speak English. Um, I've not become fluent in all of the languages of the countries that I've lived in, but no matter where I've lived and no matter for how long, um, I've always had this urge to integrate linguistically above anything else. Even before I arrived in the new country, I would be learning key phrases and looking for language courses on and trying to break my reliance on English. Um, my time in different countries has definitely taught me um, that you can learn languages outside the classroom, and that languages are a way, even if you make very, very small efforts, they're a way of taking a step towards people and showing a willingness to not rely on English, even to say hello, even to say with card, please, at the end of a transaction, or to say thank you. Um, it's amazing what impact that can have when you're living in somebody else's country.
Yeah, and even this even works on countries that aren't necessary, like that are pretty, I guess, English or like popular. Like for example, every
Mhm.
time that I go to a grocery store here in Berlin, I say "mit Karte bitte," I
Yeah.
feel like I am fully integrated into the culture, and I've been living there for thousands and thousands of years.
I mean,
That's not true at all. And the
but I
second that
wouldn't.
they ask for something else, I quiver in fear.
I would never really have felt comfortable because obviously now my life is here in France, but back when I was traveling between different countries often, I would never have felt comfortable moving to a country without at least knowing the basics and at least making an effort to move towards them, even if after 10 seconds I'm forced to go into a different language, which is often the case. But I tried, and I learnt that this is possibly one of the best little things that you can do, even as a tourist, um, to actually gain popularity with the locals. Certainly.
Yes, of course. And also, like, among ways that people try to give that little tiny extra boost into learning languages, one of the methods that people would like to use is, of course, your classic education and your classic, like, language learning process through schools. And you have been
Mm,
part of this as well. So I wanted to ask you more about your experience as a working in language education. Like you currently
mhm.
work in a French school right now,
Yeah,
correct? Right?
indeed.
Yes. So
Yeah, indeed.
what does your day-to-day role involve, and how does that connect into this sort of language learning philosophy that you have created?
Um, it's it's not as glamorous as it sounds. My job is essentially a lot of admin.
Mhm.
I spend a lot of time meeting with people all over the world, a lot like you and I today. And I spend time advising people, testing their level, listening to what they're actually wanting to achieve with the French language. I'm the first point of contact for all prospective students that come to our school. And so I take them through the enrollment process. I take them through the um, the level testing process, and I basically just reassure them. I know how it feels to move to a different country. I know how it feels to start a new language. Some people come here for many months. Some people come just for one week. But it's essential that we speak to people before they arrive to make sure that they integrate well into the life here in Lille and that they have a good experience right from even before they've left. But yeah, my job is to reassure people. I talk to people a lot, and I make sure that what they're doing and why they're coming to Lille is the best thing for them, and that they're actually going to learn French in the best conditions possible.
So it seems that like a lot of people that are coming in are people that currently do not know French and they're trying to learn it or at least trying to integrate it. But do you also get students that are the opposite, like French students that are looking to, maybe explore their possibilities abroad and learn English?
Yeah, 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 of course. It's. I would definitely say that the first case is the most popular. Foreigners coming into our school to learn French, whether they're living here or whether they're actually moving here um, to learn French. Um, However, we do get some local French people, French speakers, who are looking to improve their English.
So that's something that I would like to ask you. In your own experience, what do you find the most surprising about like the French students that want to learn English compared to these international people that want like that want to approach French?
Um, I'll say definitely the biggest difference is that French students have to learn English at school. It's obligatory, and it's often not seen as a subject. It's often seen as a cornerstone for an international life. Nearly 99% of students choose English as their first foreign language in France. Therefore, almost all French people, especially those under 40, already have a level of English, um, albeit flawed due to the education system and the way English is taught. Um, However, when it comes to international students learning French, the reasons for learning French as a foreign language are very different. Um, Not everybody learns French at school as a foreign language. Obviously, there's other foreign languages that people learn depending on what country they grow up in. Um, but also, there are complete beginners out there, which isn't necessarily the case for non-English speakers learning English. Um, Therefore, a lot of people come here to begin learning French as adults. Um, so yeah, I would definitely say that the experiences that people have are very different before they arrive. French people often come with a preconceived ideas and a preconceived set of feelings about the English language that are often quite traumatic. From school, they come and they see English as something that they've been forced to do at school and that they really didn't enjoy, and it's a stepping stone to a better, more international life. Whereas the people that come to learn French, they definitely come here with a more positive outlook, but also a more genuine love for the language and for the culture.
I didn't even
Um,
know that you could opt out of learning English, like you said,
yeah,
89%. So that means that some people are
yeah,
not even doing English. I didn't even know that
yeah.
that was an option.
It depends on where you are, because obviously, if you're living in France is huge, which means if you're living in Bayonne, or if you're living in Perpignan, or if you're living in Strasbourg, for example, it may be much more sensible for you to learn German or Spanish
Yeah.
as a foreign language because you live 2 kilometers away from Germany. Um, and that might be the argument as to choose German or Spanish over English as your first foreign language. But yeah, it's not obligatory as a first foreign language in France.
And of course, when you're like starting, even if you out of curiosity or out of survival, like starting to uh to have a language progress can be quite difficult when just following formal instructions. It's not just like you cannot just follow instructions and get like good results. So in
Mhm.
your experience, since you've talked to a lot of people with different backgrounds and different attitudes towards the language, how much do you think that the environment and the attitude used during like when during this formation, I guess it's not a word. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, training. Yeah, training
Training,
or
yeah.
learning. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Influences the like actual progress.
Of course, being in an immersive environment and being in a caring, productive environment is crucial. You can't learn anything if you're not in an environment that's caring, that's productive, that is conducive to learning. However, for me, in my experience, almost everything is dependent on attitude. You can put two people in exactly the same environment with the same teacher, with the same background, but change their attitudes, and the results of learning will be unrecognizably different. Um, Unfortunately, teachers can't teach willingness to put in effort. They can't teach curiosity. They can't teach a willingness to be vulnerable, to make mistakes. Um, and so, yeah, it's. I would definitely say that there's three major attitudinal problems that we have. and that we see every day. The first one is certainly this idea of instantaneous gratification. It's this idea that people want everything now. They think that they can walk into a classroom, learn French for 1 week, and be fluent within 3 weeks. Um, and unfortunately, this is also not dispelled by some people online and some books which are making false promises about what like learning a language is. Um, we've also, I call it the teabag effect. We've also got a lot of people who believe that just by being in a classroom they will learn.
Oh yeah.
No matter like a teabag in tea. I know it's the most British of analogies.
Hey, if it
However,
works, if it works,
they just think that if they pay for hot water and they place themselves in it,
they will immediately learn.
they will immediately, or not immediately, but with a minimal amount of effort, they will simply infuse the language through their skin and into their brain. And then certainly the third biggest problem that we come across with attitude is the idea that I'm too old. I'm
Mm,
too old. I'm too stupid. I was too bad at school. Learning languages isn't for me because I was never really good at it at school. Um, and I just say to people, everybody can learn a language. It may require different degrees of effort. There are some that have certain traits for learning languages easier,
yeah.
but everybody can. And there's no such a thing as too old, too stupid, not academic enough. Yeah.
I think
So that
it's so
yeah.
it's an attitude that I think could also be applied in a lot of other skills, like for example, cooking. Like
Mhm.
it's the same thing as like, oh, I cannot cook. Everything that I touch burns, and
Mm.
like if when you strip down and think about it, it's like that's not really a thing. Anybody can cook if you put your mind to it. It's just again you have to put different effort into different aspects, and you have
Of
to put
course.
the willingness. But also you have to be confident in what you're
Mhm.
doing. You have to find that confidence, and it is something that a lot of adults struggle. It is something that
Mhm.
Tandem has been trying to help out with, like allow
Mhm.
people to join into a conversation, just joining with a native speaker and just being able to make as many mistakes as possible. But of
Mhm.
course, like there are multiple ways to tackle this option. So I wanted maybe you could expand a little bit on like how do you help people, especially adults, overcome this fear of making mistakes in front of others?
Um, I get asked this a lot because a lot of people arrive at our school and the first thing they say is that I have no confidence. Unfortunately, I'm a firm believer that confidence isn't something you can teach. You can't teach somebody to feel more comfortable speaking a language. Feeling uneasy and feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of an interaction, lacking confidence, being aware of the fact that you're maybe making mistakes. It's all very natural, and I think that we've all felt that way. Um, and it's a cornerstone of learning a language. All the teacher can do for me is foster an environment which is kind, which is benevolent, which is trusting. But a teacher can't whitewash and can't sterilize the outside world.
Mm,
Confidence is built naturally through stressful communication, positive interactions, and eventual encouragement by people.
mhm,
But we should all be aware of this when we hear
yeah,
a foreigner speaking our language, that it's very easy for the tables to be turned. And we have to remember that we have the power to make that person's experience speaking a language a positive one and that builds their confidence. Um, I think this is easier for people who speak a smaller language because they are more empathetic with people learning languages. But people who speak very dominant languages,
yeah.
um, they don't necessarily have the language learning experiences that give them this empathy.
Yeah, and I think this is like the ability to take mistakes and like faults and try to spin a positive aspect to it. It's kind of similar to like exercising. It's like
Yeah.
you can't just decide one day, oh, I'm going to do every single exercise perfectly and it's going to be awesome and everything is going to
Mhm.
be building naturally. Sometimes, you do something bad or you feel sore the day after, and that's just part of the natural course, because that way you can start to realize that first of all it's gonna happen to you. You're like, it sounds mean to say that you're not special, because that's not what I prefer to
Mhm.
say, but everybody has made mistakes in the past.
Mhm.
Everybody is not as flawless as you think it is, especially nowadays that a lot of online spaces make it seem like it's this perfect world and everybody's perfect except for you.
Yeah.
And you take that soreness, you take that mistake, you take that mistranslation in the front of the native, and you use that, and definitely you're not gonna forget that. uh
Um, a very good way, however, of building your confidence is to speak your language to people who aren't natives. Because often there's a lot less judgment,
Mhm.
and often there's a lot less fear of inferiority.
Yeah.
For example, I learned Welsh, and I speak a lot to other people who are learning Welsh at different levels.
Mm.
And I've had a lot more positive experiences in communication with people who are also learning the language and speak better than me, rather than speaking with those that have grown up with the language.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it's like a nice midway point as a test. It's like, yeah, you're still being challenged, but it is not like a completely two different worlds that have a very different approach or a very different upbringing, for sure. One
But it
other,
is,
oh,
but it is amazing as well how many people are actually scared to speak to me in English.
yeah, I can
Um,
definitely see.
and they will go and have a conversation in fluent English to somebody who is a non-native speaker, even with a C2 level or plus, or even or even above. But then they turn to me, and you see a fear set in. Um, and I believe there is this idea of native speakerism, um, where speaking to a native speaker is like the holy grail, um, something to be feared.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I think at some point, like when that fear sets in, and some people they manage to take that fear and completely overcome it and start succeeding at a rate that is like astronomical. And you probably have seen during your multiple conversations people that have taken that fear and made it into success, and people that didn't really do that.
Hmm.
So I wanted to ask you, maybe like, if you could notice, in your opinion, a pattern in the way that people that usually succeed better maybe study or maybe think or approach languages, even outside of the class.
Um, it is definitely linked to what we've just said about getting out there, making mistakes. Um, the people I see who succeed the most in learning French, especially in an immersive environment within France, are the ones that dare. They're the ones that go up to somebody and ask. They go to a coffee shop and they need a spoon, and instead of going, oh, it's okay, I don't need a spoon. Actually, they go and ask, and they put themselves in they put themselves in uncomfortable situations, all in the name of progress. Also, people that come and admit that they've not understood something, and they come and ask for a second opinion or a second explanation. I don't necessarily work face to face with students in a learning environment. As I said previously, I spend a lot of time doing admin with prospective students. But our students come up to me and they say, "I learnt something today and I didn't quite get it. Do you mind just giving me your explanation?" And I think there's definitely very vulnerable. It, it's very it's putting yourself in a very vulnerable space to admit that you've not understood something, especially in front of others.
and it does also very depend on the type of person that you're talking to and the type and how they respond. Because
Yeah.
I have an example of this sort of fear back during the Christmas season, the holiday season. I had given a very, I'd say, weird task to test my French in. There were a bunch of nuns from the local church that were interested in learning more about language apps and how to use their phone properly. And in those moments, I could have just taken their phone, installed everything, and just give them the very basic rundown because they don't speak Italian or do not speak English. The only language that they speak is French and Armenian, but my Armenian, like, I don't even know the basics, so that one doesn't work. But I have to rely on my French. And instead, I wanted to explain like how everything worked in French, frankly not as refined version of it, even though I can speak a little bit. But in that moment, I did tons of mistakes. The nuns were like asking clarifications. Sometimes they were responding to me, and I couldn't understand. And the only way that I managed to get out of there was literally just to ask, like, "Hey, can you please repeat, or can you please explain more slowly?" And in certain situations, it might seem kind of embarrassing. It's like, oh my God, like I just wanted to download an app on a phone. You don't have to make it into a long discussion. Something that could have taken like 5 minutes to do, it's now taking an hour and a half. But
Mhm.
in that case, I thought that I was like learning so much and I was appreciating a lot of that process of learning languages. Because in the
But that
moment,
one,
hmm?
but certainly one of the most common phrases that I have to say
Yeah,
is, "Well, go ask them.
go ask them. Yeah,
Go ask,"
go
and they'll come
ask
to
them.
me and they'll go, "Do you think the person next door minds moving their car?" And I will go, "Well,
Go
go and
ask them.
speak to them. They're right there, but they don't speak French, but you do."
I
And I spend so much of my time going, "It's okay. If it all goes wrong, I'm here."
Okay, at least there's a nice safety net because a lot of people don't
Um,
even get that safety net.
yeah.
Uh, like for example, if I were to right now go and ask the post office where my damn package is, and with the broken German, I would be gonna be very honest. I'm gonna curse on the show. I would be scared shitless. I would be scared to hell, and having that person there, like, look, I'm gonna try, just like I don't expect great results because it's a pretty hard situation, but at least like it's a great way to channel my elements, and maybe sometimes it works. That's the thing. I don't say it's a gamble, but like what if
Mhm.
it works? Imagine the dopamine hit that you will receive when it does work, when you manage to actually realize that wait a minute, actually my German's kind of nice, and my package is
Also,
not coming anytime.
you
Um,
don't you don't you don't you don't you don't see almost anybody ever again.
yeah,
That's also what I say. If it all goes wrong and
true.
you make a fool of yourself and you say you pronounce a word wrong and it actually means something that's quite unsavory, it doesn't matter. You run away,
A
and
hundred
those
percent.
that person will never remember you.
That is true.
Most people can't remember what they ate for breakfast yesterday.
I actually had this exact same thing when I was traveling compared to like part of my family because they were like, no, like you're gonna make a fool of yourself trying to. This was when I was trying to learn English very well, and it was like, oh, you're trying you're acting like an American celebrity in this restaurant, trying to act cool and all. And but the servers are gonna remember you. They're gonna be disgusted by your attempt at
Mhm,
like making a fool of yourself. But yeah, you never see these people again. I don't remember that one server from that one specific restaurant. Who knows? They
mhm.
know, we don't know, and it's just like when you realize that, which is something that I don't think comes out. Like I don't think you can force this sort of mentality
No,
at all.
certainly not,
But the
certainly not.
second that you realize it, it changes completely your view. Uh,
It's interesting what you say about your family thinking that you're going to act like an American superstar because you're trying to speak English in front of
I mean,
everybody.
to be fair, I was actually acting like them. I was like my way of learning English was literally watching YouTubers and acting like
Mhm.
I was a YouTuber. So to their credit, a little bit they were right that I was acting like a YouTuber because I was literally doing that. I was
But
intentional.
you but you've stumbled on something that's actually quite common. A lot of people that I meet who are trying to learn French don't want to speak in French because they don't sound French.
Ah,
And they have this almost almost pre-installed glottophobia of themselves. And they believe that because my accent is completely comprehensible, but because it's not French and because it doesn't sound French from Paris,
Yeah.
and it's not what I see on in movies and in films, which I imagine in the English speaking world must be even more
Yeah.
daunting because of how surrounded we are by English.
Mhm.
But I just say to them, you know what? I've been living here for years. I've been learning French for decades, and I certainly don't have a French accent when I speak French, but it's never stopped me communicating.
Mm. I feel like a lot of people get very like strong stereotyping when it comes to specifically Paris. Like they always say, oh, if you're in Paris and you speak like a 99.9% great French, and it's not
Mhm.
100%, they treat you like they spit on you. They're like, ugh. And that's
Yeah.
just straight up not true. Like, let's be
I,
completely
um
honest.
I have an American student who learnt French at school in Louisiana,
Hmm.
and he actually learnt French, Cajun French, which is the
Hmm.
French spoken in Louisiana. And
There's
a
a name for
lot
that?
of yeah, it's called Cajun French. When he first arrived in Lille, he was petrified of speaking French
Mhm.
because he simply didn't want to be seen as some sort of
A foreigner. Yeah.
backwards, almost like I hate to say it, but almost like a redneck um, American who is pretending to put on an accent, where it's actually his accent is a very legitimate francophone accent that many people speak French as a first language with.
Mm.
And just because it doesn't match Paris, it's not legitimate and it's not worthy of being spoken.
Yeah. I have to admit this situation would be very weird because again, like accents are very different from each other and people sometimes don't realize that maybe a certain accent that you develop can be retraced to something similar to other parts. I know
Mhm.
that a lot of people that try to speak Italian to me and they don't have a specific like very Roman accent in my case. I could basically tell them, yeah, I mean, you don't sound Roman, but you do sound like someone from Liguria, so you're good. And they're like, wait,
Mhm.
really? So it's like it's definitely something that really requires a little bit of experience to
Mhm.
appreciate, or at least some knowledge on the various dialects and ways that people speak. I
Yeah.
think it's something supernatural. But like coming back to the world of the mindset of these like exceptional students, like in you, one thing that I want to ask if there's like a specific way to separate between the ones that give up and the ones who thrive in language learning. Like, is there something that separates these two mindsets?
Um, Certainly. It's the willingness to invest time and to respect the learning process. Um, those that are willing to sacrifice, that are willing to make themselves vulnerable, and those that realize that a language is a wealth that's worth making sacrifices for and investing time in, they are definitely the ones that succeed. It's the students that that sit thinking that it's going to be infused or that try and expedite a process. And this is actually we see so much of this mentality of instantaneous gratification, the teabag effect,
Yeah.
that we've actually had to integrate it in the way that we approach our teaching. Yeah, and we've definitely had to adapt to people not having the mindset that of others.
Yeah, unfortunately, moral of the story. Unfortunately, we are not human tea bags. It
Mm,
would be nice to be a tea bag, but unfortunately, that's not happening today.
mm,
Unfortunately, maybe one day, maybe in the future,
mhm.
we would be turned
With
on.
AI.
I mean, maybe or like some neural chips with technology. But for now, the real world does not allow for this instant change, and people will have to take in the effort and the and willingness to go through the
Mhm,
trenches.
indeed.
But again, the goal at the end of the road is quite nice. Or maybe some people decide to give up and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm fine. I know English. English is everywhere, man. English. Everybody knows
It,
English.
it's we do see this. However, it's generally speaking people that then come back.
Okay.
So they'll walk away thinking, "Oh, I don't need to learn French. It's too difficult for me. I've tried, but I've failed." And then they'll go into the real world and then they'll come back. And often they come back having experienced the world outside, and they will certainly come back with a changed mentality, but also they'll come back with this idea that French is essential for living here.
A lot of people are going to use English as a cop out, and this sort of mentality where English is the most dominant language. I don't need to learn a lot of other languages. Doesn't really not only affects like popular languages when traveling, but it also affects a lot of other more specific and regional languages. So I wanted to
Mhm.
maybe ask you as a like a little bit of a tangent. How does the dominance of English as a global language affect or similar, smaller, or regional languages?
Um, you've probably asked me my favorite question, and it's one that I can speak about for hours and hours, but I will spare you that. Um, Obviously, English is in 2026 the dominant global language of communication, trade, research,
Mhm,
business, and the ways that dynamic threatens other languages is extremely complex. And I would not be able to go into all of that. However, for me, it affects smaller languages in two ways. Firstly, the dominance of English dilutes cultures and it infiltrates spaces where traditionally other languages were commonly used. This is what I call linguistic globalization.
mhm,
And we see it in a lot of cities that are victims of over tourism, like Dubrovnik, Barcelona, Lisbon, places where culture and languages once shone are now being filled with signs in English, coffee shops where you can only buy a flat white in English, big Anglophone chains.
got it.
You can also see it in a lot of cities where there's large expat communities, for example, Brussels and Amsterdam. And any event that has the word expat in the title is always going to be a place where English is spoken at the detriment of other languages, but also at the detriment of other immigrant languages spoken in the room as first languages. Um, in both of these contexts, English is used as a tool. It's used in its most soulless of forms. And for me, what I find the saddest is that it's the language that I hear in these environments is so diluted and so culture
Like,
cultureless
mhm,
that it's drained of all of the childhood notions and attachments that I have to English. Um,
mhm,
and so that's the first thing it does, is it dilutes, other languages, their cultures. Um, the secondly, English as a lingua franca naturally places it on a pedestal above all other languages. English, it becomes the language to learn. This doesn't only mean that people learn English over every other foreign language. It also means that immigrant parents, um, neither of whom are actually Anglophones, wish for their children to grow up speaking English and only English.
mhm,
Um, and this willingness to give their children the best possible start in life and the best possible linguistic toolkit, if you will, often often means that they blindly do not teach their own languages to their children, and they often don't transmit the heritage languages to their children because English is seen as so much better.
mhm,
And this is one of the main reasons why intergenerational transmission is dying, is because within one generation we can kill off almost every language.
mhm,
All it takes tomorrow is for everybody to to raise their children in the same language, and all of the languages will die within one generation.
I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, but at least one of the great things about preserving languages is that there's tons of resources that allow people to kind of save those languages, maybe online spaces or like dedicated communities. I don't think it's like, yeah, it's very dangerous that sometimes people can completely disregard languages, and it's definitely happening. And in a previous episode, we also saw how it affects the world of academic research because
Mhm,
a lot of communities that had amazing new discoveries about philosophy or about medicine could not basically be treated because they were only speaking in Brazilian Portuguese, or they were speaking in a specific dialect, or maybe they're
mhm,
written in and I mean in the academic sense it's even like major languages. Even if you were even looking beyond that and going to like regional, or in your case Celtic languages, because we're going to talk about that soon,
mhm.
there's definitely a lot that can be preserved, but luckily there's a ton of resources and groups.
Of course. And also the tide the ti I do genuinely believe that the tide is beginning to change.
Mhm.
And I do believe that the tide is beginning to change. I see it, I see it. It's only a glimmer in the distance, but I see change happening. And you never know. First of all, lingua francas don't last forever.
Mhm.
You never know, in the next 30, 40 years, our children may be scrambling to pass their HSK exam in
Mhm.
Chinese instead of the IELTS in English. There also might be a future for us where people start seeing the value of of minority languages again, and there may actually be a boom where people, for example, living in Barcelona, say, "No, we're not putting our signs in English. The only way that we can save Catalan is by having it present on the street without any exceptions, even if people don't understand it."
And it's interesting that, I mean, there's people that, of course, are retaliating towards like this attempted loss of language diversity. But I wanted to ask you more, maybe if you have some insights on what are the biggest threats nowadays to that, like the biggest threats to linguistic diversity in Europe,
Um, well, English.
just the language.
The mentality that English is the only language worth learning, that it is the only language worth transmitting to your children, and not restoring intergenerational transmission like we once knew it. And this also is exacerbated by social media, cultural globalization, Netflix. Um, the other thing as well that comes to mind when you ask me this question is this idea of centralized governments versus regional governments.
Mhm.
And I certainly see that countries who have more locally focused governments and devolved powers, especially in terms of education and culture, are the ones that manage to preserve their languages a lot more. And this is another reason why I don't think it's a good idea, for example, for regional integration to go further than it is in places like the EU, because I see that a move towards more federalized form of the EU, for example, would have a detrimental effect on local cultures and on the policy that is made to preserve languages. Already on a federal level within Germany, they're
Mhm.
not capable of saving their minority languages because German is the language of the federal state. Imagine that if it was to imagine if it was to become imagine if that was to become a continent wide government system.
So, but so you basically, so you do think that governments should be actively trying to preserve that these language diversities,
Of
but
course.
what about like communities? Or like, do you think the communities also should be involved, or is it mostly like responsible for like a governmental body to take this on?
I see the problem of linguistic diversity. I see it as exactly the same as saving the planet.
Mm.
It's exactly the same problem. We are losing something precious that we need to get back. And that takes not only um, government strategies, policies, and the power and influence of national and international governments.
Mhm.
But also, it requires communication of such projects and awareness down to the community level so that
Mhm.
people can actually take the actions. And one can't exist without the other.
I see.
You can't have a government dictating language policy without any buy-in from local speaker communities, and you can't have speaker communities battling to save their language
Yeah.
with no support from governments. The two need to work together, and this, unfortunately, this is what's happening in the last example that I gave there is actually what's happening in France.
And that's actually interesting to see because, like, now you talked about Germany, becoming a federal, like, it's not called a federal state, but federalization of Germany. And
Mhm,
but while the rest of Europe is surprisingly, even though they have a lot of things in common and with the EU, there's also a lot of differences in the way that they approach things like culture or things like languages. So maybe in
mhm.
your experience, since you got to see so many places, like, have you noticed some policies that maybe differ between France or the UK or somewhere else? Like maybe they differ in the way that they preserve languages and culture?
It couldn't be more different. It couldn't be more different. Um, France is a heavily centralized state.
I see.
Paris is the center of France for everything, and Paris sets the bar that other regions have to jump over. Which means that if Paris isn't interested, and if Paris doesn't give the go ahead, it doesn't happen.
Mhm.
Whereas the UK is a nation of nations, which means that in all of the four composited countries of the UK, there's actually devolved powers, which means that Wales has its own Senedd, um,
Mhm.
Scotland has its own parliament, Northern Ireland has its own assembly, and this allows them and gives them the power to make policy to preserve their own languages. And the biggest example of this is the Languages of Scotland Act, which was passed in 2025, um, which was actually put through and made it put into Scottish law, which actually made Scottish Gaelic and also Scots, which is a somewhere on the spectrum between a dialect and a language, official languages that have the same status as English within Scotland. And only they, with devolved powers, have the capacity to make policy that has that effect. And in France, regions have no power.
Because I
Um,
was about to ask about Breton, if there's
yeah,
like anything about it that like any sort of movements or developments, but it seems like.
of course, there's movements, but they're all community led.
Mhm.
They're all community led, and Paris doesn't really care, and they certainly don't give any autonomy to these regions to have a say in how their languages are promoted. And even, for example, bilingual road signs, which are something which in Wales is law and which are paid for by the state through taxpayer money, bilingual road signs in places like Brittany or places like Alsace, they have to be paid for through donations,
Oh,
and
I see.
they have to be paid for by local
Yeah, I see.
charities and associations, and sometimes they're even taken down by the
Oh
state.
no.
And they're actually taken. And another example is in Brittany, you can't have any non-French symbols in your name.
Oh.
So, for example, in the Breton language, there is the N with the tilde,
Mhm.
like in the word espagnol.
Okay.
Okay, and that exists, and that's a letter in Breton. However, the French government does not allow you to call your child any Breton name which has this letter in it, because the French centralized law doesn't allow children to be registered with any non-French letters in their name.
It seems like it could be a very easy fix logistic wise. I don't know why they're still very adamant about
Um,
this. It's because
yeah,
by
yeah.
mind I was like, oh, maybe computers are not that like useful when it comes to like this sort of characters that aren't as popular, even though again they're
Mhm,
in Spanish. But I think
mm.
there's very little excuse to not allow this sort of things.
And just like linguistic diversity isn't being transmitted from generation to generation, losing names. If you can't call your child a traditional Breton name, you're going to call that child Pierre. You're going to call that child Guillaume, okay? Because it fits the bill. Um, and then we realized that within one generation, because of this policy, nobody is calling their children traditional Celtic names anymore.
Mhm. And yeah, and I mean, even if people, because I also notice from my own life, like when I discovered like some of the names that some of my ancestors had, and I was asking about like why wasn't I given a name that fit those ancestral
Mhm,
changes, and
mhm,
not only there's like the possibility that it's like no, you cannot be called that like
mhm.
legally, but it's also there's sometimes it can be also a little bit of a stigma. Sometimes
Yeah.
people think, oh, you're a minority name. That's a weird, like weirder name that you don't hear every day. So people are gonna make fun of you, and
Uh, uh, uh,
and I know it's like the name is at the end of the day something I don't want to say insignificant, but like something that it doesn't like can't really
mhm,
explain why changing a name or like having a different name matters that much. It's like, oh, it's just your name. You're gonna be living with it for the next years. Like, come on, like you don't
mhm,
have to think about that. It's but it does really make you wonder, like how many different legacies or like ancestry chains have been broken because of this like seemingly like very not that strong roadblock or like not that strong,
yeah.
sorry, not that like justifiable roadblock.
But going back to the idea of names,
Hmm.
we're talking about places like Alsace, we're talking about places like Brittany,
Yeah.
which are communities which historically have not experienced the same oppression as, for example, indigenous communities in certain colonized nations.
Hmm.
Now, imagine the effect, for example, of the Hispanization of indigenous names in South America,
Yeah,
and how quickly these names, which were very common, have disappeared and have been replaced by what we would now identify as as a very Hispanic name.
I see.
So it's happening all over. It's happening all over the world.
And maybe like a little bit of a question. We're approaching the end of our program, so we're gonna start going through the last couple of questions that I have. But before
Mhm.
going to the full on like final questions, I wanted to ask you if you maybe have like examples of like places that do this sort of like language preservation pretty well, or if they do not, if you had any possible ideas on how to make it better.
Um, I don't have any examples of a country that really treats minority and minoritized languages very well. What I do have is an example of a country that treats multilingualism very well.
Okay.
Okay. And I would say that that's Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg, for me, is a fantastic example of a fully functioning, integrated multilingual system. Um, Unlike multilingual nations, for example, Belgium and Switzerland, languages aren't separated out by geography and community.
Mm,
Languages exist throughout all of the territory of the nation.
yeah.
They are simply used differently in different contexts. Okay. Whereas obviously in Belgium, you have Flanders, which is Flemish speaking. You have
Yeah.
the German speaking communities. You have Wallonia, which is French speaking. And these lines are almost drawn in the sand. And God forbid you speak French to somebody in Flanders or vice versa, you know? However, Luxembourg has created a system where languages are used depending on the context. For example, a lot of justice is done in German.
Mm.
A lot of television is done in French. A
Oh.
lot of legal texts are written in French. A lot of TV programs are made in Luxembourgish. And it actually depends on what government agency you're interacting with, or what area of life you're dealing with will dictate what language you learn. And they're even able to do this with Portuguese, which is a language which is not an official language of Luxembourg,
Yeah, I was about to ask. It's like,
uh,
some.
but is but is a huge linguistic community in Luxembourg.
Is it now? I did
And
not
they've
know that.
even managed to integrate Portuguese into their little system of what language do we use to deal with this particular problem.
Huh.
And coronavirus was a fantastic. I hate to bring it up. I do apologize, but
Oh, it's
going
okay.
to Luxembourg during coronavirus was a linguistic journey.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can see it.
Information was given in so many languages, and you could go and get information in almost every language, and they created a way for everybody to feel like their language was being respected. It's the same if you write to a government office in Luxembourg; they're obliged to respond to you in the language you've sent the um,
That's nice.
the communication in. Which obviously, in something like Switzerland
I,
or something like Belgium, it
yeah,
would
that's
depend
really
on where
important.
you are. It would depend on who you are, and it
Yeah.
depends on who you fall onto as to which language
Hmm.
um, you receive a response.
Yeah. So I guess there is a little bit of hope in the world of places that could take this to at least to preserve it. Of course, Luxembourg is very small, so
Yeah,
they
they, they,
definitely.
they've had to do it to survive, really. But they've done a fantastic job of keeping their language alive, which, let's be honest, is a very small language which is surrounded by very, very big languages,
Mhm.
and they've managed to keep it alive by keeping this sort of multilingual seesaw in the air. And I always think it's a fantastic example.
Yeah. And I think we are coming to the end of the show. So get ready for our
Hmm.
last question of the time. We had a lot of very interesting look in a lot of different areas. So to kind of tie everything up, I wanted to maybe ask you if you could give like one piece of advice for anybody, either like learning a language and trying to adapt or, trying to preserve their own
Hmm.
language rights, what would it be? Both like coming as as a teacher yourself or like someone that works in the schooling and education system, as well as a lifelong learner and, you know,
Hmm.
curiosity driven language enthusiast.
For those that are learning a language, my biggest piece of advice is that slow and steady wins the race.
Yes.
A language is not something you just get and you have in its entirety. It's not buying an iPhone, it's not installing a new app on your phone. Learning a language is a lifetime marathon that never ends, really. And it's certainly not a time sprint. Just like running a marathon, there'll be moments when you feel really strong and you feel really ambitious and you feel really gratified by what you've achieved. Other times you will feel vulnerable, defeated, weak. And both of these feelings are very, very valid. Um, I mean, I've been learning French for 17 years.
Yeah.
I dream in French, I work in French, I feel in French, I love in French every day. However, not a week goes by when I don't have a doubt. And not a week goes by when I don't think that word was masculine.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was not the right gender of that word.
Yeah.
But then again, French people make mistakes. I make some mistakes in English,
Everyone.
and that's my mother tongue. So there's no shame in it.
Yeah, there's literally no shame in it. And even like
Yeah.
trying things out, maybe trying a little bit of a technique or a strategy that maybe people don't like to use. It's
Hmm.
also like a great source of getting that sort of a skill involved because at the end of the day, not one strategy works for everybody. So you could definitely find your own environment that works better for you or the right language that works for you. Sometimes people can have very different opinions on certain
Hmm.
languages. Some people love some people love the other ones. So yeah, the great thing though, just like the little books that they let you read back when you're a baby, slow and steady wins the race. Like
Indeed.
the turtle was onto something when I don't know when
Indeed.
that book was made or when that little story was starting to told. I think they were onto something. The makers were, but
I agree.
I think again, thank you so much, Luke, for
You're
coming
very
into this
welcome. It's been an
episode.
absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and maybe for the people that want to maybe learn more about your journey, or if there's a project that you're particularly passionate about, you can tell us right now, and we'll put all the links in the comments below.
Well, I'm not particularly working on any projects. However, I do have social media. Okay,
Mhm.
and I go under the handle of Lukie Lingual, Lukie Lingual, and I post content on there. I also speak to a lot of people, and discuss their different projects. I will be at the Polyglot gathering, which will be taking place in Brno in May, where I will be speaking. And I'll actually be speaking about my local dialect of the region and national park where I grew up,
Oh
which is
wow.
something that almost nobody knows anything about. And again, is being lost. So this is more dialect loss, more than language loss. And so if you do want to discover some words in some random British dialect,
Yeah.
come along. I'm also sure that it'll be on YouTube afterwards.
Yes. Like a lot, they come a little bit later after the event. I was in the event last year, and it was a ton of fun getting to meet a lot of the polyglots everywhere in the world, and like
Hmm.
what all of they or what they strive to make the language community as richer and as like diverse as it is. I'm taking a little bit of a pause because I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be next year, but probably. But in general, if you guys want to learn more about this event, I will put the link in the description of both the video when it
Yeah.
comes out, or if there is like some information, some teasers, if you're interested in joining the actual event, that will be in the description as well. But in the meantime, uh, sorry, you wanted to say something, Luke?
No, I just also wanted to say that that if anybody ever comes to Lille, obviously Lille is a pretty much an intersection of Europe where people often come through for various reasons. Feel free to contact me. It's always a pleasure to meet up for a drink, and some Belgian fries.
Uh,
They're not as French as
they,
as you may believe.
they have been lying to you. They have been
Indeed,
lying to you. They
but not about the tortoise and the hare.
No, no, that one is true. Okay. That was a true story, guys. I was
That was a
there.
true.
I was there when the tortoise won. It's crazy. But in general, thank you all so much for watching this episode of the Connected by Language podcast. Do you know a minority language or a language that is worth preserving? You can tell us in the comment below. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a like and maybe follow for, to stay tuned on the next episode. I wonder what next, like what who is gonna come here next time to talk about the language journey and what will happen next. Well, there's only one way to find out. Stay tuned for a new episode, and I guess in the meantime, I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.